Now, a question from Dennis Dinkelmeyer. He says, why do we not own Alphabet? Google valuation and growth are very attractive, and the company has a very strong moat. And then one from Krithika Subramanian. Why don't we buy Apple shares?
Okay. I mean, we do look at all these companies, and we kick the tires on them regularly, and we do spend a lot of time thinking about them. I mean, moat, by the way, is a Warren Buffettism for the ability of a company that's got great returns to defend those returns. Because if you've got wonderful returns on capital, like our companies with their 29%, there's a good law of economics called mean reversion, which says that competition should arrive and try and take that return from you. We're looking, as does Warren Buffett and as this gentleman's question suggests, for people who've got defensive mechanisms for warding off that competition. It's typically things like brands, customer relationships, and so on. So we do, look for the companies of the sort you described. I guess, why don't I start with Alphabet, Google, and then Jules perhaps can talk about Apple a bit. On Alphabet, Google, it's a company that's got a very powerful market position, the dominant position, unassailable probably, in online search, and it's got a duopoly in digital advertising as a result. The duopoly is with Facebook. Basically, if you want to advertise a product, if you talk to any of our consumer companies and say, tell me about advertising and marketing, the words which will come out are Facebook and Google. So that's what it's got. That's great. But when you look at the returns, because it says here, this is a company with, it's very attractive, the returns aren't that great. The return on capital employed last year, and this is not atypical of the last half dozen years, is 17%. It's about the average for the market. Is that it? So that's the first problem. I mean, it's not actually shooting the lights out in terms of those numbers. Then you get on to something else. When we researched it, we found that they had made 235 acquisitions, what's now called Alphabet. And that's kind of interesting because most of them have been dire failures. So their capital allocation process looks really bad. They've got this original core business, and all of their attempts to expand outside that by acquisition have so far been very poor. Latterly, and I think one or two other people around the world are playing with another conclusion. It doesn't necessarily still want to make me go out and buy the shares, but I'm playing with another conclusion, which is nobody's that bad. I wonder whether they meant them to fail, whether they're actually buying things and shutting them down, and whether one day, as a result, we may see some great returns emerge again because they'll have killed everybody who's competing with them by that process. Now, that's clearly, from a societal standpoint, a rather interesting thing, but we're not here as regulators of competition. We're here as your fund managers trying to run investments for you. It's an interesting strategy, if that's what they're doing. So we're having another think about it in the light of that at the moment. But the short answer is it doesn't currently produce returns of the sort that we seek, but I'm suspicious that the strategy is eventually going to perhaps deliver that through this rather interesting process of buying up people and ridding the world of them. Yeah. Jules, do you want to do Apple?
Yeah. So the point of this, I think one thing to preface this slide with is to say the reason we don't own Apple is not because we think Apple's a poor company. It's because if Fundsmith fails, and God, I hope it doesn't, the reason will be because we pick companies which we're not particularly sure of, but they happen to be very fashionable at the time. And if you look at Apple's returns going back, so you'll start with 1977 to 1985 when Steve Jobs first invented the company, and obviously things went pretty well. And then you'll see that when he was fired and he left the company, things obviously went fairly, not apple-shaped, but pear-shaped. And then when he came back, things went extremely well. And then after he passed away, obviously they had more of a product at this stage, but things haven't gone nearly as well. And then if you go on to the next slide, you'll see that, one of the things that I think we've mentioned this in one of these meetings in the past, is that if you actually were to, if you listen to the reports of Apple's results, all you ever hear is about iPhone sales or iPad sales or latterly wearable sales or services sales. But in fact, last year sales actually fell slightly and cash flows have actually been static for a while now, But in the meantime, the shares have obviously trebled. It's not that we think it's a poor business, it's just that we have seen companies like this in the past. In our old business, we used to go in with our old financial model called Quest and tell people that Nokia, whose share price was 65, was worth 12. And we turned out to be wrong because it turned out to be worth 4.
Or 4.
And people used to go on about...
You were too bullish.
People used to go on about their ecosystem and nothing would ever break this up. So things like that just make us a little uncertain.
Yeah, I mean, that chart pattern there, one of the things that scares us is fashion businesses. Fashion businesses always need a guiding genius, and when the guiding genius is no longer there or just loses interest in the subject, they don't do very well. If I were to put up fashion businesses from the past and you looked at them and they'd done very well, if I put up FC UK or something like that, you would find a pattern that looks like that, basically. Guiding genius there, great. Guiding genius no longer there or no longer attentive, that's what you get. And it just feels a bit like that's the pattern, that actually what we've got here is something that produces cool things with curved corners, right? And it's a bit fashionable, and it's kind of, has it got the guiding genius to do the next really cool thing that is going to capture things? I'm not too sure looking at that.
But I mean, why has their cash conversion rate been so uninspiring, given that it's a popular product? I mean, surely when you've reached that market saturation point, you just put the price up.
Yeah, I think Julian, probably understands this better than I do, so I'll talk about it, as is traditional. I think one of the problems that they face is, what do you do next? I mean, maybe the answer is yes, but are we really going to be sitting here talking about iPhone 57 at some point? I mean, what's the new feature? One of the things, going back to fashion and the somewhat static, you can see on that chart there, the sales and cash flows have been relatively static compared to the share price. Another scary thing is, what's the extra value? Because I think in the end, you have to provide some utility to people to be able to get additional sales and profits and cash flows. There's it was a piece of Samsung online clever advertising, and it was a bit of a while back now, and it was a queue outside an Apple store waiting for the iPhone 8 or whatever it was to be launched, and it was just a clever piece of Samsung advertising. So they'd go up to somebody in the queue. I've got my phone here, and they go, "What do you? I've got it. What do you think of the new 8?" And they go, "Oh God, yeah, its screen's so much bigger, isn't it? And it's so much lighter. And yeah, look at this feature here." And they go, "Oh, sorry, I've given you the old one." Yeah. Oops. There isn't any difference. Is there really any difference other than fashion? Because then it comes down to it's just fashion. The better one I like was they went up to the sort of the teenager in the queue and sort of said, "It's great to see young people still interested in being here overnight, sleeping out on Regent Street, waiting for the Apple Store to open. You're really looking forward to having the new iPhone 8." He said, "No, I'm keeping a position for my granddad." So maybe it's got something to do with the fact that there isn't a great deal of additional utility in an iPhone 11 Pro versus something else. Although we were trying to take a photograph of a rainbow, which was spectacular, from our office window this evening, and Julian and I were lamenting the fact that we didn't have one. So,
Right, emerging markets.